Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm here today to share with you my Read Across Canada list for 2023. So I have a bit of a long story about this TBR list. I actually created it at the end of 2020 and was thinking I would do this project in 2021. And as I got closer to 2021, things started to come together and for my reading year and my reading plans, and I just fell out of the idea that I wanted to stick to a list specifically, and I kind of abandoned it. So I didn't get rid of obviously the list itself. It was still in my notebook, and I ended up thinking about it all through 2021 and subsequently all through 2022. And so at the end of 2022, I thought, I'm still thinking about that list. I still haven't read most of the books on it. So I think I'm going to do it for 2023. And then this very interesting challenge was created. I'm going to put the details of it here and down below. And it is a Read Across Canada challenge. So there's a whole set of prompts that were set up and everything that goes. And I haven't actually thought about how the prompts connect to these books on this list. I just thought it was interesting that another Canadian booktuber was putting this challenge together this year and that I had finally decided to read this list. So they're just kind of coinciding for me. And it's possible that when I wrap up this list at the end of the year altogether, I will also relate it to the prompts and see how many I actually accomplished. So I wrote this list from east to west. So I'm starting in Newfoundland. I picked a book per province or territory. At first, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do fiction, nonfiction, poetry. I just kind of left it all out there as different options. But as I was putting the list together, I decided I really wanted to stick to novels and just go with novels for this list. Perhaps in future, I'll try to do poetry or nonfiction. But for this list, I'm sticking specifically to novels, and they're from all different time periods as well. So the first novel I've already started reading in January is Small Game Hunting at the Local Coward Gun Club by Megan Gail Coles. This is a novel that was nominated for the Giller Prize. It was on the long list. The Giller Prize is a very prestigious book prize in Canada. It was also on Canada Reads. It did not win, but it was on the short list. And this is set in Newfoundland in February, so it's got a wintry vibe to it. And it's a story told through multiple perspectives around this restaurant, this kind of trendy, upper scale, restaurant where they make fancy food, kind of fancy hip food. And you follow a different cast of characters that all live in this town, but they're all living in St. John's, Newfoundland, which is the largest and capital city. But they've also come from different areas, so they're representing different perspectives about Newfoundland itself. So that is my Newfoundland read. And next I will take you to Nova Scotia. So this book is called In the Field by Tacon. And this one is set in Nova Scotia as a woman and her son travel back to the small town that she grew up in after, being away and living in the city and kind of having a different type of life. I really like these types of stories, these types of, person leaves the small town, goes and lives somewhere else, and then comes back to the small town and is kind of reconciling that change and who they've turned into when they've been away. So this is a very typical story that I enjoy, and I picked this book up several years ago now, secondhand, when I was traveling in Alberta. So looking forward to this one. Next, we have New Brunswick, and the book that I've chosen from New Brunswick is George and Rue by George Elliott Clarke. So this is a really interesting novel. This novel is based on a true story from George Elliott Clarke's own family. So he is a 7th generation Black Canadian living in Nova Scotia, and in his past, 2 of his cousins kind of went on this crime spree. And so he has looked into this, and he's created a novel around the circumstances that led to this crime that they did. And I believe the 2 characters in the novel are Indigenous and Black, and it is set in the, I believe, late 1940s. So really interested in this. George Elliott Clarke is, I believe, quite famous as a poet, so this was his first novel, and I'm really interested in reading it. When we get to Prince Edward Island, I know I should branch out, but I'm going with Lucy Maud Montgomery, and I'm going to read The Blue Castle. So this is a standalone novel that she wrote, and I think it has a different feeling from the Anne of Green Gables series and the Emily of New Moon series, all of which I have read. So when I heard someone talk about this book a few years ago, I thought, I really think this sounds like an intriguing standalone novel that Lucy Maud Montgomery wrote. It is about a woman who's 29 and not yet married, and what's going on around her as she's trying to find romance, but knowing that she's actually an old spinster in according to everyone else, because she hasn't gotten married yet. So very interested in reading another Lucy Maud Montgomery and just like expanding my knowledge of her writing. Next we get to Quebec, and in Quebec I have chosen Rue by Kim Thuy. And this book is actually on a TBR of mine a few years ago. I believe it was for Asian Heritage Month, but when I went to get it out from the library in an e-copy, it was taken out. And so I decided to replace it with another novel, and I didn't actually get to reading it. But this story follows a Vietnamese Canadian story. And so you follow their immigration from Vietnam to Canada, and they settle in Quebec. And so it was actually written in French. Oh, and I didn't get the translator, but I would put their name here. And it's based on Kim Thuy's family's journey themselves that they took to get to Quebec. So it is both an immigration story and a story about settling in a new place and all the things that go along with that. Okay, so now we're going to go up to Nunavut, because Nunavut is technically kind of above Quebec and Ontario. And I've actually read my books on the list for Nunavut. These are the only ones that I've read so far. So these are illustrated novels. I would say they're young adult novels, and I read these with my son Elliott. The first one is Those Who Run in the Sky by Aviaq Johnston, and the sequel to that is Those Who Dwell Below. And so we've read both of these. They are excellent. They really give you a sense of Inuit culture. You also get a wonderful transportative journey into Inuit stories, Inuit legends, and the way that they have survived and subsisted in such a harsh environment for thousands of years. So I really recommend these. I wouldn't say they're for young children. So, I would say 10 or 11 plus, because they can be a bit scary, and some of the descriptions of the creatures that are encountered on the shamanic journeys taken by Paternic, who's our main character, can be a little bit frightening, I think. But overall, these are excellent books that I highly recommend from Nunavut. Okay, so now we're going into Ontario. And my Ontario selection is Crow Lake by Mary Lawson. Now, Mary Lawson was nominated for the Booker Prize in 2021 for another novel whose name I can't remember. Again, I'll put it here. But I chose this one because it's, I have a thing for crows, so I liked the title. And also I liked the description of this. This is kind of a family drama happening in, I think, a small town in more northern Ontario. And sort of like relationship issues between a sister and some brothers, and like her feelings of like loving her brothers so much, but then also realizing she has to separate herself from them. So there's just really an intriguing plot to me. And so Crow Lake will be my Ontario read. Next we get to Manitoba. And from Manitoba, I picked The Break by Katherena Vermette. So I read Katherena Vermette's poetry collection, River Woman, in 2022, and it was lovely. I've had The Break on my TBR for years, probably since it came out. And Katherena Vermette just released last year a new novel. So I feel very behind on her writing. And this is set in Winnipeg. This is set, there's something that happens on this piece of land called The Break, witnessed by a woman from her window, and it is, I believe, a crime, and then a whole bunch of people start telling their versions of what happened in the story, and so it ends up being a kind of compilation of multiple perspectives from this particular area of the city of Winnipeg. So very, very excited to get to this one. This was also on Canada Reads. So a lot of these books were on Canada Reads. For Saskatchewan, I picked A Beauty by Connie Gault. This is set in 1930 Saskatchewan. It follows two women, one of whom is kind of enigmatic, and it's one of those novels about how one person affects the lives of so many people around them. So sounds very intriguing, and I think it's supposed to be quite beautifully written and quite lyrical. So looking forward to that. From Alberta, I've chosen Birdie by Tracey Lindberg. Tracey Lindberg is an Indigenous author, and this story is a travel story, so I love road trip stories, about a woman from the Cree Nation who travels from Alberta out to the Sunshine Coast in Gibsons, BC, to search out this Indigenous man who is on a TV show, because she believes he's going to be a wonderful person based on the fact that he was in this TV show. So really looking forward to this one. Obviously, I have road tripped within Alberta and British Columbia myself, so I'm looking forward to hearing about the places that she chooses to feature on the roads. And Gibsons, BC, I've been there several times, and I've been to Molly's Reach as well, which is another place she talks about going in Gibsons. So looking forward to getting to this one. I've also had this one on my TBR for quite a long time. So from British Columbia, I decided to pick Obasan by Joy Kogawa. This is a really important novel. I believe it was one of the first novels written about the Canadian government's internment of Japanese Canadians during World War II. This is based on Joy Kogawa's family's own story, and I can go and visit Joy Kogawa's home, which is in Kitsilano here in Vancouver. So I will kind of pair the experience of reading the book with visiting her home. It's now a museum, and I'm really excited to finally get to this book. Many of these books I've had on my TBR for years, so really excited to finally read them. We are almost at the end here. Okay, so next we have the Northwest Territories. From the Northwest Territories, I picked The Lesser Blessed by Richard Van Camp. This is Richard Van Camp's first novel. He writes a lot of children's literature, and he writes short story collections. And Richard Van Camp is a Dene, an Indigenous man of the Dene, I believe. And this story follows two different Indigenous men. So one who's from the Northwest Territories and one who's from Alberta, I believe, who travels up there, and their friendship and the things that happen to them. It also, I believe, has an LGBTQ undertone and talks about the AIDS crisis and things like that. So that's going to be I'm pretty sure that's going to be my Northwest Territories. I was also looking at some other Richard Van Camp books, like whether maybe I would prefer a short story collection. So These last two I'm kind of leaving open a little bit. The same from the Yukon. The first book I put on the list was The Wildfire Season by Andrew Pyper, which is a thriller horror story. And just looking over the reviews, I mean, it's not wildly reviewed. And I don't usually read thriller and horror, but I like to kind of throw some new things in there sometimes and just read from different genres. Andrew Pyper is not from the Yukon. He's not a Yukon author, but the book is set in the Yukon. So I was trying to look up quickly before I filmed if there were some other books written by Yukon authors that I could try. I did find another trilogy set in the Yukon by someone who travels extensively in the Northwest Territories and Yukon area, but she too is not from the Yukon. So I'm going to be very loose about these last two and leave them open to change if I decide that I'm not feeling those books in that moment. If you have any books to recommend by Northwest Territory or Yukon authors, please let me know. So I have read books set up there before, but I'm interested in searching out authors, Indigenous or settler authors who actually live in those places. So that is my Reads Across Canada list. I am very excited to read this list. It's interesting to me that I made it, then kind of decided to abandon it, but then it just kept niggling at my brain and would not let me leave it until I'd completed it. So that's what 2023 is going to be. I am hoping to get through all these books this year. I don't know how realistic that is given my reading, but we shall see. And I will probably, be talking about them each month as I'm wrapping them up, but then I definitely will make a video that will sum up my thoughts on all the books that I read for this project later. If you're interested in looking, please check out Bookworm Adventures channel and join in with us reading across Canada. There is so much variety that you can choose from in terms of Canadian lit, from Indigenous literature to marginalized voices, different communities that have been living here for hundreds of years that may not get the same representation as the average white European settler authors. So please do some research, find the things that you really stand out to you, and enjoy reading across Canada. And I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.